Thank you again for joining us. And it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Brian and Linda Crawford. They probably don't need much of an introduction because they have participated in our prayer conferences several times over the years. And they're longtime friends of mine since our days together during language school in Bangkok back in the 1980s. And they're currently on home assignment and joining us from Utopia, Ontario, just a little north of Toronto. So we're pleased to turn over to them now. Over to you.
I'm grateful for Micah running our PowerPoint for us. Good. Okay. Oh, that's the very end slide. There we go. Great. Thanks, Micah. So yeah, actually great to be with you all again. It was 20 years ago this weekend. It was our first time ever physically with you. That was long before virtual conferences were even thought of. So thank you for having us in it again this year, celebrating his faithfulness with you. We want to give a little bit of background to what we've been up to, what the Mekong sector and our area of Southeast Asia looks like currently. We've listed several prayer points, which you all have received by email. I won't detail all the prayer points word for word as we go to them, but I will highlight just a few. And we want to give you time to ask us some questions because we figure you will have questions. So on to the next slide. Yeah, so Mekong, as it was first known back in the mid-90s, included Southwest China, Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, and Myanmar, with a focus on the minorities. So not the major people group of these countries, but the minority people groups, like the Karen or the Hmong, the Aka, the Bui, and many other minority people groups. Next slide. Currently, we've got 8 adults with 6 children resident in China. That's a huge change from 2018, when the Chinese government began inviting people in for tea, asking questions, what are you doing here in our land of China? We had at one point as many as 60 plus adults and many kids in China. So that's been a significant shift for us to absorb and to figure out, okay, what do we do with all of our workers who are not allowed to be living in China now? Many families, singles, also came to Chiang Mai initially in 2018-19, and many have stayed, others have gone on to different spots. In Vietnam, we've just got one family with 5 kids focused on the Black Thai in northern Vietnam. In Laos, currently down to 7 adults with 10 children in Laos. We have Brian and Christina Song, Canadians, with one daughter, Sophia, based in Taiwan, because they also had to get out of China. Yeah. In Thailand, about 35 adults and a big crowd of kids, either in Chiang Mai City or Chiang Rai. One Thai sister doing further studies in Bangkok while she also waits for the door to open to return to get to China. About a dozen Mekong members are either teaching in a local Christian international school in Chiang Mai or Chiang Rai. And we've got actually 2 Canadian couples now serving in boarding homes in Chiang Mai. So we've got Darren and Shauna Blanken with their 5 kids in Chiang Mai, and recently arrived Ben and Donna McPherson from out west, also Alberta, just arrived, and they're serving in the Mountain View dorm in Chiang Mai. A little bit of explanation here, this point on the screen. We currently have representation from all 6 sectors of the bigger China and beyond area living in Chiang Mai City. So in OMF International, China and beyond is an area. When it was initially formed, going back 10 years or so, 450 members of OMF International, part of this bigger area. 6 sectors, Mekong sector being one of the 6 and the biggest sector with over 100 members. Because of that exodus that started in 2018 and then more recently COVID, we've got people that had no intention of living in Chiang Mai a couple of years ago, but now they're stuck in Chiang Mai. So we've got from this, I won't get into the details of all the 6 sectors, but it's been a big demographic change for us who've lived in Chiang Mai a long time, just sorting out, okay, how do we incorporate these other members of OMF into fellowship times, prayer times, and pastoral member care as well.
link it with the copy.
And next slide. I want to make a point of thanking God for our 5 female Thai staff in the finance office at the Mekong Center that we work out of. There's the 5 girls pictured in the back of the picture there, the photograph. This is an appreciation meal for them August last year for all the great technical, detailed work that they've done for many, many years. And they're a great part of our bigger team serving together. Actually servicing, supporting, financing, the finance tracking for, again, 600 or more members of OMF International, all done in the office at the Mekong Center. Next slide, please.
Over this last term, well, and the last couple of terms, our responsibilities have been that Brian has served as the advisor to the Mekong leadership team, and together Brian and I serve as pastoral member care coordinators. And we do that for the Mekong minorities sector that Brian has just described, for the OMF Myanmar Rivers field, which is in the country of Myanmar, and for the OMF Vietnam field. And as we journey with various field leaders and the members of these different fields, we occasionally have to be brought in or to focus on situations that require some specific pastoral member care. Some of those situations can take a couple of weeks to rectify. Others, we journey with people for weeks and months, and even checking in for years after the fact. We appreciate prayer for the wisdom that's always needed as we do these member care responsibilities. And in these last 3 years, in spite of the COVID situation, we've been able to attend the annual field conference of each of these groups, in some cases physically, and in some virtually. And this was the case in January of this year. We enjoyed attending the Vietnam virtual conference. And interesting, even though this would seem like sort of the lesser opportunity, we had a very good time with the folks there, got to know some of the new colleagues that we'd not met face-to-face before, and get to know them better on a personal level. And it's just been great to see how we could use the virtual Zoom and various things to connect with people, even though we were in a pandemic, and how the Lord used those meetings to really bless and encourage people.
Great. Many of you have been praying for us over the years, these 2 decades, and so a few little updates on the Intertribal Church in Chiang Mai. We're not any longer intimately involved here, not regularly Sunday by Sunday. We're glad we went to a Sunday service way back 2 years ago now, June 2020. That was, I think, the last service they were permitted to meet physically. So we took the opportunity to take this photo. We did this with the leaders and their spouses because this was a special keepsake. Many of the people in this picture were just single upper high school aged kids when we first met them in 1992. We've journeyed with lots of these folks over the years, being part of their weddings. You can go on to the next slide there, Micah, please. Yeah, the 2 fellows in white, Hmong guys, from completely, we used to say, from heathen backgrounds up in the mountains of North Thailand, animistic people. We were part of both of their weddings. Great to see them as church elders now and doing the baptizing of a new believer just out in a pond outside of Chiang Mai City just in the past year. Fellow on the right, that's his family, B and Dang, Red, and their 2 sons. Also the girl, Dang, the mom, is also a fruit of OMF labor up in the mountains. Robert and Muriel Williams from England. This girl would have done Sunday school with Muriel back in the mid 80s as just a little 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old. And it's great to see them going on with the Lord in these days. Mekong has for a number of years had a pretty significant ministry called AIDS Care. The reality of AIDS and HIV positive people is still an ongoing reality in North Thailand, even though it doesn't make the news anymore. So we reach out to these families with financial assistance, practical, providing money to help families buy uniforms for kids to go to school, school books, pencils, paper. A lot of the situations involve grandparents raising the grandkids because the middle set, the parents of the grandkids are gone. They've died from AIDS in the last 10, 15 years. And some still, we've been part of funerals just in the last 2 years of 25, 29-year-olds who have succumbed to AIDS. But it's an effective ministry where the gospel is always emphasized. Next. A recent picture, be encouraged. This is in Myanmar. Andrew Goodman, our colleague, former director of Mekong sector, now the field director for Myanmar Rivers Field. Andrew himself is actually 1/4 Burmese, so he's got a special vested interest in Myanmar. He's still in country today. He's on like a 6-7 week tour, visiting our colleagues. We have colleagues that have managed to stay in or get back into Myanmar in recent months. This was a baptism about 3-4 weeks ago now in northern Myanmar, mostly Karen. I think as many as 33 in this picture were baptized. So that's an amazing thing. God is continuing to build his church in a war-ravaged land because of the coup of February 1st last year. A British doctor colleague in Myanmar today has said, it's kind of like there's 30 civil wars going on now in Myanmar, and he doesn't expect Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, to ever return to being the Burma that we used to know. So we can be praying for Burma, and we've got a prayer point for that. Next slide.
As part of our pastoral member care role, we facilitate come away retreats, as we call them. They are spiritual formation retreats that have a component of silence and solitude in them. These retreats are 7 days long and have been a real refreshment and encouragement to many of our colleagues. We get OMFers from various countries, Japan, Cambodia, the Philippines, who are tired and need a break and just some special time with the Lord. And so they come to Thailand when they could before COVID. And we've had some very, very precious times with them and with the Lord in these week-long retreats. More recently, because of COVID restrictions, nobody could come from outside the country, but we were still able to run these retreats. And in order to make them viable, we invited people from other missions and ministries within Thailand and especially within Chiang Mai. And we were able to run 3 of these between October of last year and January of this year, just before we came on home assignment. This picture just shows the kneeling stools that we use for our retreats and the beautiful arrangement that you see in the center. That happens every Friday evening, the last evening of these retreats. We have a special time of communion around the Lord's table. And Brian very much enjoys going out and getting flowers and leaves and things and putting together a beautiful display around the elements. So these have been a real blessing, and it's been a real joy and privilege for us as a couple to be able to do this particular ministry together.
Prakampi learn. So Prakampi is the Thai word for Bible. And yes, the spelling of learn, L-E-A-R-N-N-N, is how they have it. Just to draw attention to this online Bible study option for Thai people, not just in Thailand, but anywhere. I recently discovered on closer looking, one of my new students that I mark his assignments whenever he submits them. He's actually resident in the Middle East at the moment, working as many Thai. There are tens of thousands of Thai working in Saudi Arabia and other places, Taiwan, where they can earn a greater income and then send money home to parents or their families back in Thailand. It's an online Bible study program, 1,300 plus Thai people registered, some Lao as well. I've got one Lao student actually at the moment, but Lao language and Thai language are quite similar. And many Lao people through Thai TV can speak Thai just fine and read it and speak it and interact with Thai language. So I've got several students that I'm tracking with from time to time. They do studies, they watch a video from the Jesus movie, they read some scripture, and they answer the multiple choice questions. And then there's always at least 2 questions at the end of each set that they have to answer in their own words. And that would be my special prayer request for this Prakampi Learn thing, is because of the Thai education system, which is very much rote, a lot of busy work, a lot of repetition, a lot of memorization of the correct answers to put down on the exam, thinking skills and having the confidence for Thai people to actually answer what they're really thinking, what they really understand, what they really feel. Critical thinking is sometimes missing. And I, from time to time, have to respond back to them and say, okay, but tell me what you really think. What does this really mean for you? What does the truth of being made in the image of God mean for you in your life? So appreciate prayer on that level as well. On to our prayer points. Again, you've got these on the document, and Micah will put them up in the chat. So I won't read them word for word now. Encouraged to see what's happening in Laos. That's point number 1. Especially encouraged, point number 2, the Northern Thai Yuan in North Thailand is just considered a minority group, even though they number more than 7 million people. There are churches amongst the Northern Thai, but a lot of them quite stagnant and not growing. We have good momentum now, a big growing team of actually over 30 people, including Northern Thai Yuan pastors and evangelists. On to the next slide. Yeah, our annual conference happens, we call it Reunion or Picnic for security reasons, is happening June 21 to 26 in Chiang Mai, together with all the saints. This is the first opportunity really because of COVID to gather together. It'll be a smaller gathering because at least half of our membership is headed on home assignment now through these June, July, August months because they haven't been able to leave their countries because of COVID. Now they can. So pray for conference, we pray. 5, an Asian colleague in China was taken in for questioning on May 19th. There was sort of silence for a while. Then he spoke up to his facilitator. Haven't heard if his cell phone and computer have been returned to him yet or not. So pray for this family. They have 2 kids. Pray for peace, wisdom, and protection for this young family. The next slide, please. Specifically for Myanmar Riversfield, yeah, it's again, Ukraine has kind of taken over the headline news internationally, but the situation in Myanmar continues to be very, very tense, very extremely difficult. Many millions of people just living with 30 minutes of electricity per day in the hottest time of the year, where the heat is easily 40, 42 Celsius at midday, and they don't have the option of turning a fan on even to move the air. So difficult practicalities for people in Myanmar these days. COVID and the coup has meant that many of our Myanmar Riversfield members have needed to find, if they wanted to get to Asia, so many came to Chiang Mai. We have more than a dozen now living on visas down in Mesot. So Mesot is right on the border of Thailand and Myanmar with the river in between. There's a bridge that connects Thailand and Myanmar, and many thousands of Burmese have fled Myanmar, some of them literally walking through the river into Thailand to seek refuge here. Of course, this creates an opportunity for us to get the gospel to these people coming into Thailand. Good. On to the next slide.
Okay, and just a little bit personal and family. We got back to Canada 2 months ago. Actually, it's a little longer than that now. And we are settling into a rented basement apartment. At this point, we're realizing that we need to have more of a base in Canada than we've had in the past. So we'd appreciate your prayers for the Lord to provide longer term housing. Secondly, with this basing a little more in Canada, we are trying to sort out sort of a blend of responsibilities that would allow us to be in Canada some of the year and then traveling back to Thailand for ministry as well. So as leadership sorts out the way forward, we would appreciate your prayers for clarity and for guidance in that. We hope to travel to Thailand October, November, to be involved in member care, in conferences, in leading come away retreats. Thank you for praying that we can do that. And as the time draws near, that the Lord will bring that about in a straightforward way. We also want to say how grateful we are that my mom is doing well at 91. She is still living on her own, but it's important for us to be nearby in these days. So thank you again for the times you have prayed for her and for continuing to be interested in her well-being.
Next slide.
Also, just some more family before we go to prayer. Some of you will remember our children and what they were like 20 years ago when we would come to the conferences and come as a family of 5. So we wanted to update you on our children. This is our youngest, our daughter Brianna, and her husband Caleb, and 1-year-old Nathan. We had the privilege of being part of Caleb's ordination service just 3 weeks ago. It was very God-honoring, and we are excited for them as they move forward as a couple in pastoral ministry. And as you pray for Brianna, today is her birthday.
Good. Next slide.
And then our oldest is Bethany here on the left with her husband DJ and their 3 children. Elias is in the center, he's 5. Graceland to your left is 3, and brand new baby Rosalie is 5.5 months. Bethany and DJ are on staff at a Bible college and seminary in Cambridge, Ontario. And then in the middle of our 2 girls is our son Luke and his wife Emily with baby Judah. Judah's almost 7 months old now. And Luke is a senior high youth pastor at Emmanuel Baptist Church here in Barrie, Ontario. So that's what our kids are up to.
Good. And a picture of us just about a year ago on a hike on a mountain near Chiang Mai. The caption here, Nun Wat Dai, translates the hill to measure your heart. So this is just before the final 400 meters of walking up some steep steps to the summit of this small mountain. And then finally, Ra Rusik Kok Kun Samrap Okat Ti Ja Bang Pan Gap Pinong Wani Kap. So thank you for giving us this opportunity today to share with you. Actually, 35 years ago today, June 4th, we were only into week number 3 of Thai language and culture studies in Bangkok. So we celebrate God's faithfulness and thank you for journeying with us over these many years. And we'll let you ask some questions now. Yep. And we'll answer and then we'll go to prayer.
Yes. Questions, anyone?
Brian, what do you see your ministry looking like regarding the projects in Canada coming up?
Yeah, member care, personnel, we're still sorting that out. So yeah, so some that will keep us plenty busy here, as well as interacting with field side. COVID has brought things like this, opportunities to connect over Zoom. So we're going to use that to our advantage to stay in touch with field side members, Mekong, Myanmar, Vietnam, and beyond, and also across Canada, just as we sort things out with leadership here. So we're still getting there, and our next printed or email prayer update should provide more details, so you can pray more knowledgeably about what we're really up to. So we're still figuring it out ourselves.
Yeah, we knew coming home that we had more questions than answers about what this might look like. So we're still in process sorting that out, but we will keep you posted.
Brian, in Myanmar, how is the persecution of Christians there?
Yeah, I'll refer to one example, for instance, the Shan, who are up in Shan State in northern Myanmar. Yeah, they are a staunchly Buddhist people, even though mixed with animism. The Shan in Thailand are probably more staunchly Buddhist than the typical Thai Buddhist is. So in Myanmar, yeah, for example, a Shan who comes to Christ would receive some pushback from family, some perhaps outright rejection. you know, you're turning traitor on us if you're changing from being a Shan Buddhist to becoming a Christ follower. And that's a significant, a huge, life worldview decision that changes a lot of things. So there certainly is that sort of thing going on. The greater reality, the more real reality in Myanmar today, as I said, is these mini civil wars happening all over the place. They thought after the coup, there was a season of it seemed like minorities were going to pull together, and that is still happening. But it was more, pulling together to create an army to fight back against the Burmese army. And so it's a land, it's very sad. It's a land filled with strife and death. Many pastors through COVID, before the coup, have died. Pastors that were trying to get out and shepherd their flocks and care and minister and help, but they themselves succumbed to COVID. So that's been, very, very sad. It's very sorrowful, but they soldier on, as the picture of the baptisms showed. God's church is still being built against all human odds. But it's hard. It's very hard.
Brian, is it kind of like intertribal warfare? Is that, to just try to get a picture in my mind what you're describing?
A bit like that. I have to confess, because I don't live and serve there, I don't really have firsthand knowledge really of how it's all working. I think if we think intertribal warfare like we might have imagined in Africa, it's not that. It's different. So you've got just different factions, sometimes even within minorities, that are opposed to each other, and they just can't find a good middle way forward. So it's a really desperate situation in many levels, and extremely complex.
And I think also, Pam, differences between these minorities in how they would handle the Burmese oppression, so not being able to maybe agree to one way forward. And so that brings disunity, if that makes sense. There's a lot of very terrible things going on in Myanmar.
And we've even heard there is Chinese money that filters into some of these independent minority armies, because the Chinese government has an agenda actually in northern Myanmar to accomplish things and to build railways and I could go on, but so it's extremely complex. The whole Rohingya exodus, 700,000+ Rohingya Muslims being forced out of Western Myanmar into Bangladesh, which is already a desperately impoverished nation, experiences, horrific flooding every year without question, hugely difficult situations going on. We have a German family with 3 boys just returned from Germany, managed to get back into Myanmar and Sitwe. So that's very Western Myanmar, next to this whole where the Rohingya used to live, but they're focused on Burmese citizens with the gospel. But very courageous of them to be there. But they're really effective workers. So that's Jojo and Sarah Botas from Germany. And we praise the Lord, they managed to get back in about 8 weeks ago.
And their 3 boys are something like 5, 3, and baby. So it's a very young family.
Yeah. But they've got very good relationships, and they have Burmese in their home all the time. So they're a stellar family.
What does the Church of Christ in Thailand have with the Karen now?
Church of Christ in Thailand with Karen. I'm not really sure, Helen, specifically, but we've one of our challenges within Thailand, which we have also in a place like Canada, is multiple denominations focused on the same peoples, and there's greater or lesser degree of cooperation on that level as well in a place like Thailand. So the Karen Baptist Convention in Thailand is strong. It's growing, ministering to Karen refugees out of Burma in particular, because they share an affinity being Karen. So,
thank you,
Brian. What about the role? A couple of years ago, we were told a number of thousands were transported out of Burma and left on an island that had fairly recently arisen from the sea. We haven't heard any word how they're managing or
We haven't got any up-to-date information on how that goes. What we do have is, say, up in Mahongsan, so a 6-hour drive from Chiang Mai northwest to the Thailand-Burma border. Many refugees, a lot of them would have been Karen, came into Thailand, Mahongsan or Omkoi. Oliver and Deborah Myra from Alberta, Mekong members, went down to Omkoi to the police station to minister, to bless, to visit with Burmese-speaking, Karen-speaking Burmese that had basically walked from Burma into Thailand, showed up in Omkoi. Many of those people, possibly 100 or more, the Thai government actually insisted and forced back into Burma in these last 4 weeks. So again, just using your imagination, it's a very, very desperate reality for these people. They lost everything in Burma. It's either been destroyed or burned by, like Burmese army goes through burning whole villages, raping, pillaging. This is a modern day reality. These dear people got to Omkoi county town in Thailand. We're allowed to stay there in the prison for a couple of weeks, but then the government forced them back into Myanmar. So, I don't know what their current predicament is.
Could you give us any insight as to Thailand's political situation? It's sort of gone maybe a little quiet during the COVID, but yeah, what's happening in terms of the instability there?
Yeah, Thailand remains an enigma, really. The word Thai actually means free, and still Thailand in the middle of, with Myanmar to the west, China to the north, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia. Thailand is a bit of a quandary because on the one hand, we exist with relative, very strong, stable stability. On the other hand, there's always often rumblings in the newspapers, on the radio. We have the king died in 2016, the new king, his son is in. I have to be careful what I say publicly on there or I could get thrown in prison. So the most recent rumbling would be from the idea of one of the former female prime ministers of Thailand from this big, powerful Shinawatra family, silk producers, they're multi-billionaires. A daughter, so a granddaughter actually, there's been rumblings that she might try and get involved in politics. And so there's always rumblings going on, but really on a day-to-day basis, Thailand somehow manages to remain stable and life goes on.
We get a lot of news from South Thailand.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, here in Listowel, we have been involved very much with a family who had ended up not with any particular mission, well, Mennonites in Narati Wat. And they had, yeah, I couldn't believe that. But we met all kinds of Thai people through them, been helping with some language study and so on. But it's interesting that in the South, it's surging again.
Yeah.
After all these years.
Yeah.
Yeah, South Thailand, so the 3 Malay Muslim provinces connected immediately to the northern Malaysia border. Yeah, ongoing violence, killings, even beheadings, shootings of teachers, riding their motorcycle from a school back home at the end of the day. And this little mini gang of 2 or 3 people with rifles jumps out of the ditch and shoots them. So that's also a current reality that still happens in a place like Thailand. It just seems unthinkable, but it still happens. So, OMF does have workers still in South Thailand, getting the gospel out to Muslims in particular.
Okay, well, thank you so much you've covered a lot because Mekong covers a lot as well, and it's great for all that you've shared.